Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jason Tucker, and this is WPwatercooler episode number 353. And today's topic, we're going to be discussing. Let's see here. How do we go about this? Everything comes up Google, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit today. Before we get started in that, I want to let you know that ServerPress Maker's desktop server are who bring this show to you via their monetary contribution. I really appreciate that. Go over to their website over at serverpress.com and learn about all the different tools and products that they have going on over there. We really appreciate them for helping us out. Let's go around the room real quick, get everyone introduced. Let's see here. Mr. Mullenweg, yourself. Tell us about yourself.
What up, everyone? You know who it is. It's Fat Mullenweg, a.k.a. Jason Cosper, a.k.a. the woolly mammoth of web dev. Just here to talk some WordPress, talk about Google's influence on WordPress and the growing the influence that they have. And I'm looking forward to talking with the other three of you today.
Awesome. Jonathan, how's it going?
It's going good. It's good to be here. Jonathan Wold from beautiful North Idaho, though I live in Washington now, but it's practically North Idaho, right on the edge. I work in a community at WooCommerce, and always happy to talk about Google.
Sweet. How about you, Steve?
I'm Steve Zengit. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive, and I run the OC WordPress meetup.
Awesome. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on Twitter.
Don't do that
to me. Yep, you can find me over Jason Tucker on Twitter. My website is jasontucker.blog, and you can go over to our website over there at WPwatercooler.com. We talked today about press releases in WordPress and why you should or shouldn't do it. You can go check that out over at WPwatercooler.com/WPblab and see all of that's going on over there. So yeah, Cosper, as he alluded in his intro, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Google's recent involvement with WordPress development and a bunch of stuff with like lazy loading and sitemaps, and there has to be some other cool stuff that's happening in there as well. I mean, we're going to be able to talk to like our person in a box and have it respond back with one of our blog posts or something. Like where does this end, right?
Yeah, sure. Ultimately, okay, so for those of you who aren't aware, Google has kind of taken it upon themselves to work on two features that they're targeting for WordPress 5.4. They haven't made it into the current beta versions of WordPress 5.4, which I know that most of our audience, if not all of our audience, is not running yet because they tend to be a little less technical as far as running bleeding edge software, especially on a production or their daily site. However, Google basically has taken it upon themselves to do this development for XML sitemaps, which basically tells Google and other search engines, these are all the pages on my site that I want you to index, like, crawl them as you may, figure out what my site, looks like to you, and just basically makes it easier for Google to know what content you have on your site and, what they can crawl. And then they've also done another plugin, which Jason will switch to this tab right now, is lazy loading, which for those of you who aren't aware, in Google Chrome, they added a specification for loading an image that's not on the screen. So basically everything that loads at the top of your screen, above the fold, as it's referred to by web developers, basically it says, okay, if this isn't in the viewport, don't load the image until you actually scroll down to it. Or, basically it's not needed for viewing the page immediately. Like get the quickest, get the site loaded the quickest way possible, basically.
Which both of these things sound really great for
Absolutely.
Google. Sounds like a really great thing. Well, all search engines, but definitely for Google.
I mean, it's great. It's great for the users because they're not using those resources until they need them, as far as lazy loading goes. Also, if and when XML sitemaps get included in WordPress core, that means that they won't have to run a plugin like Yoast SEO unless they want the SEO benefits. If they're just using Yoast SEO because they want a sitemap to give to Google, now it's just like, oh, okay, it's baked into WordPress core. You don't need to have that. You don't need to have an XML sitemap plugin. And some of them that aren't Yoast SEO, some of just the straight XML sitemap plugins are a little load and resource heavy. They tend to load this stuff, dynamically in some cases. The things don't cache well, stuff like that. So it is a benefit to users, but yes, it mainly benefits Google.
That's interesting because the fact that we've already looked at lazy loading in the past. I mean, we've been using, sites have been using lazy loading for a while now. You have the different tools that are now coming out with being able to do Gutenberg. You have page builders that do this stuff as well. You have all these different, ways of kind of making this happen. And it's nice to see that, we may end up getting this thing built into core. But if we're also building these things ourselves, on our own projects, we just need to make sure we're kind of implementing them after the fact. Right? I mean, is that kind of what it comes down to? Yeah.
Yeah. Let's give Steve and Jonathan a chance to say something.
No,
I kind of monopolized it.
I think what I'm interested in, I've most enjoyed. I mean, the technical discussion is interesting, like what it actually does and how it works. But to then see the comments on lazy loading in particular, initially the concern was like, wait a minute, this is a feature that's only currently supported by Chrome.
Right.
Now, and so then it's like the timing of this, because if it's in WordPress and supported by Chrome, like there's a lot of dangerous assumptions that you could make here, positive or negative. But then it's like, if I was in Chrome trying to push something forward and I could get it into WordPress, then the other browsers kind of all need to follow suit. So just setting this specific issue aside. So if you look at the timing and wanted to find something, then, okay, well, that's kind of interesting to look at the timing, all of this. This is not an official spec, or it's not something that's been adopted by the W3, whatever they're
W3C.
That's whatever the standards body was.
That's right.
Yeah.
However, as you look through the rest of the comments and people are adding in, so Firefox is working on this and Safari is working on this.
Yeah.
So the
here's Firefox's offering
is definitely, it's the timing's interesting, but it's like you can find whatever narrative. If people were looking for something to like call out Google for their negative influence, then they might cite something like this. The reality, though, is that no, this is perhaps a little bit early, but this does look like the direction that the browsers are going. And WordPress adding support for something is definitely the key to it. Like that's a big part of, if WordPress supports something, then that's a big boon for the browsers trying to get something done.
And fortunately, this isn't like one of those situations where it's the marquee tag all over again or the blink tag all over again, right. Where a browser
we need to bring back the blink tag, please. We got to bring it back.
The blink tag still works.
I know.
So, but it's one of
Safari is doing it as well. I mean, back in September, Safari was already talking about this, of getting lazy loading going in there as well. So, yeah, I mean, and Safari runs tons of stuff. I mean, that brings in, Microsoft Edge. It brings in pretty much anything that's using WebKit is essentially going to end up having that as well. So that's a good thing.
Yep.
Especially on mobile. Oh my gosh, on mobile, it's going to be great.
Also worth mentioning, in the case of lazy loading, if your site is not loading these images, yes, okay, Google benefits because it's a feature that's already baked into their browser, which has the greatest market share, et cetera, et cetera. However, and something I'm sending over to Jason, and he'll put in the notes. Denny Van Kooten wrote this great piece on CO2 emissions and what that means for the web. Like basically how many CPU cycles, energy usage by web traffic effectively factors in, and shaving off kilobytes, shaving off a single kilobyte. Jason, you just scrolled past it. It was back up there. A single kilobyte in a file that's being loaded on 2 million websites reduces CO2 emissions by an estimated 2,950 kilograms per month.
Wow.
Okay, to not load those images unless they're requested, that shaves off a whole lot more than just a single kilobyte. Yeah. So looking at this from like an actual green perspective, not putting those emissions into the air for all of those images that aren't loading if you're not scrolling down so far on the page, that's a massive impact for everybody. Like more than Google just benefits from that.
So we need more of those crappy websites that people are just bouncing off of to use this, so we're not loading a bunch of images on the through the browser because you went to the site for 4 seconds and then you left.
One of the things that I think about here with WordPress is that it's easy to overlook how big an impact decisions can have, like just on the web as a whole. So when I look at proposals, the question that always, because like for instance, this one from Felix, a lot of good detail here. The question that's sort of in the back of my mind are, what are the ramifications that we're not considering of this move, right? Like what are the, for instance, if it turned out that Safari and Firefox did not recommend this solution, that would be an example of a ramification that I think would be important in a proposal to call out consciously. And that's not the case at all. This is something that looks pretty straightforward. But I think in general, one thing for us to be considering for the project as it continues to grow is when we make a proposal, what are the considerations? What are the potential ramifications that go far and beyond the scope of what the individual championing it might be thinking and caring about, right? Because someone who tends to be an expert in something, they will bring their perspective and they'll think through as much of it as they can. I think in general, I prefer to always assume good faith on the part of people who are contributing their time and energy to core. Yet, even in good faith, because it's so big, there are so many ramifications that we just can't consider. So anyway, I think that's something I'd love to be seeing more of as we go forward, is what's not obvious about this, but if people realized it, would probably give pause or a lot more weight to something.
Yeah, I
get stuff into WordPress.
Especially when you're talking about something like XML sitemap. I mean, if Google wants to change something if Google wanted to change something regarding sitemaps,
yeah,
being as close as you can to a project that is running, a good chunk of the internet,
totally makes
sounds
sense.
like a great idea to do.
Yep.
We've seen these things in the past where, some projects work well, some projects don't work out. Some of them are used everywhere, but we don't ever talk about them because it's just kind of, it's magic and it just works. So it's, I don't know. I think it's a good thing. I think it's just, we need to be cognizant of it and be able to, kind of look at this as a community and how this is being built out.
Have any of you been following the work on the WP Notify proposal?
No.
Mm-mm.
So you should. It's excellent. And so it itself, the idea is bringing a notification system into WordPress and thinking through like how to do that. So that's interesting of itself. But I think what's even more interesting is the work that Jonathan and the rest of the volunteers are doing to take a fresh look at that process of bringing big features into WordPress. And big, not so at this point, something in WordPress is big, whether it's like because of the impact, whether it's, when I say a big feature, it doesn't mean like the notifications can end up being something big. It could also be kind of tiny, but the way that it is implemented has a lot of ramifications. So they're doing some excellent work. They have a great Google Doc that's linked in here somewhere. I think it might be in the comments, that is one of the best that I've seen, sort of talking through down at the bottom. Here's the requirements document. It has a link to it.
So is this for the notifications that show up in the dashboard?
Well, so see, and this is what I'll cite specifically from it. So it is to deal with notifications, and that there's a lot of questions that got triggered. So most of the time, because I had a good chat with Jonathan recently. That's something I'm talking about myself, but I'm not. Most of the time, the project so far has been spent understanding the use case and thinking through the ramifications. And there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, this is needed. Let's start coding. But the team involved has been saying, wait a minute, like, let's take longer. Let's go through this. Let's think it through. Let's document our rationale. Let's really spend the time. And if this, like for me, I'm someone who loves to, okay, let's get something done. Let's jump in and get it done. We're now talking though about a third of the web. And like whenever this project reaches its conclusion, it will be well documented. They have done the diligence, and no one will ever be happy with everything, right? Like there are always going to be people who are going to be unhappy with it. But if it's been well documented and thought through, and you can see that trail, what led to that point, then you can say, okay, I don't maybe agree with this, or I don't like it, but I can understand it. So I in general, as we're bringing things into WordPress, I would just continue to like to see more rigor and bringing up the ramifications. And I don't know, I'm excited to see examples like this being worked on.
Well, and using your example of the notification side of things, if you don't watch it and you don't,
which most people won't.
it goes crazy.
Yep.
You end up with full banner ads throughout the whole website about one image SEO plugin that goes like, look at me the entire time. You're like, come on, and then you have to run some kind of plugin that's going to clean that out, and it doesn't do it. It doesn't remove that stuff. So
when I see a proposal, the question I'm kind of asking is what else is behind this? Like what's not in the proposal? Because as humans, and again, like I think these two here, this isn't a comment on Felix Work's work or Thierry's here. As humans, we want to put the best stuff forward. So it can be tempting to just, let's not deal with this issue over here, right? And in open source, it has to be there. You have to understand what are we weighing and making a recommendation. And what I've loved about the Notify project so far, you look at the Google Doc, it's got a history there where, and it's the comments of people with concerns, et cetera. It's documented. And I can also see who's contributed to this, like who's put time into this. Sometimes you'll have someone champion a proposal, but there's a whole other body of work that you don't have any context for. So, anyway, stuff.
And to kind of focus on the Notify project a little bit, I think it's great for WordPress to have a way to deal with notifications.
Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting and maybe kind of like you're talking about the ramifications. Okay, so we've made this easy way to deal with notifications. Does that mean that more plugins start adding notifications when you install them, even though they can be dealt with? We want to make sure that we don't have users that are running into a very real thing known as notification fatigue, where they just see a notification and exit out when they should be like, oh crap, I need to pay attention to this. There's an update for something. There's something like that. So I do agree with you that kind of thinking about the ramifications is a very good thing.
And this bridges into another piece, which I'm looking through the document here, is the simple fact that mobile integration is something that's being discussed in this document. And if my own website, where I installed the plugin that just recently got updated and somebody figured out how notifications works, is now sending me notifications to my phone, letting me know that this great image SEO plugin is in there. Are you kidding me? Like the amount of support requests you're going to be getting from your customers is just going to be insane.
Of the process in action, that when it started out, and this is why things like this take time. One of the things that Jonathan mentioned that they've worked on is a discussion about the types of notifications and doing some work to classify all the possibilities and to think differently about them. Like an advertisement is one type of notification. There are some notifications that are like critical security update. Like there's things that need to like be treated differently. And for me, the lens through all of this is if we're thinking of WordPress as an operating system, you need a good way of handling notifications. On any operating system, we have different things. We have how the Mac handles it. We have how it's handled on Windows. And in similar fashion, we need to make some conscious decisions that will have big ramifications, because what I love about WordPress is that you can do whatever you want. At some point, though, we want to say, okay, this is the best practice. Plugin authors, please do it this way. We've thought through the ramifications. We're trying to create a better experience that empowers non-technical people. We don't want to overwhelm them anymore. And if they don't do it, at some point, we can start. I still want to see like a rating system of some sort that goes beyond user ratings in the plugin repository. And we can factor in things like, do they adhere to best practices? So
yeah.
But these are all weighty things that can have a big impact that deserve time to think through them.
Yeah.
So to go back to Google, don't want to stomp on what you're about to say, Steve. To go back.
I wasn't saying it.
Okay. To go back to Google, I mean, looking at just the XML sitemap plugin and that request for feature, to test out the feature plugin. I don't see anything in the conversation around Bing or DuckDuckGo, or we have all these search engines that a lot of people treat as also RAMs that also crawl these sites that also depend on sitemaps. And I mean, and that's just America. In other countries, you have Yandex, you have all of these other search engines that also depend on these XML sitemaps that basically they're just depending on Google to implement this, or they don't even know that Google is trying to implement this.
That's a question I'd love to know immediately. Like, what do the other engines think about this? Do they agree with this proposal? And if they did, then that holds a lot of weight for me. And if they didn't, that holds a lot of weight, right? Where those are the types of questions. Maybe someone's done that diligence already, but that's a good example of the type of thing that I'd love to see surfaced. Where
it looks like Steve just slipped into the other room. Maybe he's asking about it.
he had to go get his notes because he has a lot to say about this subject matter.
I'm back.
Yeah, well, I know you went to go get your notes so you can speak in the subject matter. So
absolutely, I actually have not a lot to add on this episode, but that's okay.
Well, I do have a little bit here. So, for instance, with WordPress itself, WordPress rolled out Gravatar years and years ago, right?
Yeah.
And now everyone uses Gravatar. Sometimes it's the default. And there's an assumption that everyone is using Gravatar and has created a Gravatar for their email address and all that sort of thing. And so because of that, it's like they're kind of like leaning on this technology to be used to have images show up on various forums and sites and stuff like that.
Yep.
With this, when it comes to XML sitemaps, if Google's the big one, if Google's the one that's going to be doing this, you would think that DuckDuckGo and all of these other search engines that are out there are going to want to use the same essentially standard to be able to do this. But that also means that Google might be the one that is the only one that's making that standard, and maybe DuckDuckGo has a better idea to be able to do with this. And does that mean that they need to get involved in this as well? This is kind of make this all work.
I think our responsibility in the project really weighs in. Like, I'll call out my bias. Like, in general, while I have concerns about Google's like business model and just the focus on advertising, but I know that there are some fantastic people, and I know a number of them who really care about the open web, who work at Google and contribute to things like this.
Yeah.
So in general, I prefer to give, even with the bigger context, I like to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I've found that to be well warranted. There's a lot of excellent contributions, and I think they're an important part of all of this. But our responsibility in the project is to not just go for whoever shows up first or whoever puts the most weight behind something. We have to think about, okay, thank you, Google, for your contributions, and we appreciate all that you put into this, and you have a lot of important things to say. We have to think about the bigger web, including we're trying to democratize publishing globally, not just in English parts of the world. So what do the other engines have to think? What do others who are impacted by this have to think? And I think there's some responsibility on our part to proactively seek that out, not just sometimes we overemphasize the meritocracy of this, right? Where, well, Google put in the work, and yes, I'm grateful that they have, but we should also proactively seek out input and feedback from others. My guess on something like this, at the end of the day, this is probably what we do. But
Right.
for that one time where we favored too much the guidance of the person who put in the work versus the bigger ramifications, and not even like we can even assume good faith on their part, but like people
Sure.
are biased towards what they know, and we in the project need to be thinking from a bigger picture perspective and keeping a healthy tension between the different parts of the web.
Yeah, like Rochelle Wise is saying in here that just like Gutenberg, which was, you know, community built, community driven, all of those sorts of things. Because as long as, you know, there are good hooks and options in there in order to be able to disable things, you could disable it as well. So for instance, if Yoast wanted to say, hey, if you want to use our implementation of sitemap still, then here's what you need to do in order to do that. You flip the switch on here in Yoast, or you go over to in Core and you switch something saying turn off sitemaps, and then let it kind of show up, you know, using whatever the other plugin is that's going to do that.
We need to maintain choice, giving people the ability to do what they want to do. I get excited about things like this where we're setting standards and offering guidance towards best practices. And those best practices, we just need to have confidence that those best practices are inclusive and broader ramifications.
Yeah, and that's with lazy loading as well. You're going to have the same sort of thing where it's like, if your plugin is doing lazy loading a very specific way, then you're going to have the same sort of thing of being able to disable the one that's built into Core so that you could do it. Or the developer needs to build their tool in a way that will use the existing framework to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also just want to touch on this. I know we only have a few minutes left. I do think it's interesting that right now, as it stands, the largest single contributor to WordPress is Automatic. That makes sense because they're the company that WordPress built. But now you have this second company, Google, who dipped their toe into things with the AMP plugin, with working on that standard and getting it implemented, worked with Automatic on getting it implemented. And now they're dipping their toe in a little bit further and saying, okay, let's look at lazy loading. Let's look at XML sitemaps. I'm not trying to fearmonger or anything else, but where does this go since we have a company that has a tendency, look at something like Chrome.
Yeah.
They were building that on top of WebKit, on top of an open piece of software for years and years, and then went, this doesn't suit us anymore. Let's go ahead and fork it, make our own thing. Now they've got Blink. I just want to make sure I'll take the improvements as long as we can keep getting them. But at some point, we don't end up with this, funky fork of WordPress, Google maintained fork of WordPress that's optimized for their computing environment or whatever, which might benefit some people, but then would just end up fracturing the project.
I think the best way that I've thought about this a lot, the best way that I thought of to frame this, if we can maintain a healthy tension between people who have a vested interest in the future of the web, that's one of the best things that we can do. I'd love to see Microsoft getting more involved in the project. I'd love to see Mozilla more consciously and directly involved in the project. And I think folks who have an interest in an open web, of which Google does, this is part of why it's pretty easy for me to have that good faith. They don't want a web where everything is closed up or where everything's on Facebook, for instance. They have an interest in this. So I think we have to recognize that organizations will have their biases and they'll invest in things that are aligned with their interests. And so let's do our best to maintain a healthy tension and invite participation from those who might not find it as obvious, and then seek it out. And I think that's the best way that I know, is if you can keep things in a healthy tension with each other. Microsoft doesn't want Google to win all the things. They're trying, and so let's get them involved in the project too.
Yep. Well, I think that's about it, folks. I want to say thank you very much for all of you for hanging out with us and discussing this. Everyone in the chat that was participating, we really appreciate it. If you like this content, hit the share button. We'd really appreciate that. And if you enjoyed this and you want to subscribe, you can subscribe as well. Go over to our website over at WPwatercooler.com/subscribe, where you can learn how to subscribe to this and all the other shows that happen here on WP Watercoolers Network. Also, I do want to let you know that we did launch a new show called Dev Branch, and you can go take a look at that over at WPwatercooler.com/Dev Branch. And soon enough, that's going to be showing up in all of your podcast places of choice. So feel free to go take a look at that. That's going to be monthly, so it's only going to be 12 a year, but it's going to be fun, and we're having a good time with getting that stuff out there. So thank you very much for hanging out. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.